I want to say a few words about the Tunisian president. And even though Tunisia is not really that important geopolitically for the United States, even for France, which Tunisia was a former colony of France, it's not that important. But why did it start this whole revolution thing? And it's really about the personality of the president and his stronghold over the country. Most people think of Mubarak as the harshest dictator. President Zain al-Abidine Ben Ali was just as harsh and was just as strong in terms of his control of the population, his security forces. Tunisia has had the highest police to population ratio in the world. That tells you something about security forces and the role of the president in terms of controlling the media, controlling business, controlling universities, controlling every aspect of society in Tunisia. So when he came down within a few weeks, that sparked a massive revolt in Egypt and other places, that if this can happen to Ben Ali, it could happen to anybody else. Not exactly in the same way, but there was a lot of hope for that. His background was from the 1960s, from the army. He started the intelligence unit in the army for 10 years. He was head of the Interior Ministry, which is kind of the equivalent of the FBI for a while. He later became prime minister for a few months, and then overthrew the former president in a coup, which was okay with France, was okay with the United States, because he was the security guy that the West usually supports in the Middle East. His first 10 years in office were okay for most of the population, even though he came down really hard on any kind of political opposition, especially Islamic parties. Given what was happening in the early 90s in Algeria, most Tunisians didn't want to see a civil war happening in Tunisia. So there was a lot of crackdown on any kind of opposition, especially Islamic opposition. And as I said a minute ago, it wasn't a big deal for the vast majority of the population. As long as there is, access to jobs, access to education, a decent quality of life, most people were willing to give up that freedom of speech and political freedom for a while. Then in the late 1990s and early 2000s, his wife's family started to take over the business sector. And these are not educated people, these are not big business people, these are average middle class who gained power through the president's security forces and increased in arrogance and increased in oppression, and they just started grabbing businesses and grabbing people's assets left and right. Swiss bank accounts as of last week estimate close to $1 billion worth of assets for the family, only in Switzerland. So that's what we're talking about in terms of if this can happen to this strong ruling family in Tunisia, it could happen to Mubarak and others. When he first took power in 1987, he promised to change the constitution. He did change the constitution to not allow for lifetime presidency, so that was a positive move. But then in 2003, which was the end of his third term based on the constitution, for some reason, the Tunisian people, 99% of the population, begged him to run again. So he said, let's change the constitution. So we did change the constitution, and he ran again, and he was still in office until early 2011. So that tells you something about the political system and how strong the ruling political party was in terms of rigging elections and controlling every aspect of the political and social life in Tunisia. He was obsessed with security, as I just explained. In 2003, right before the end of his legal third term, there was a mysterious emergency meeting for the top 6 people in the military. They were called for an emergency meeting with the president. They were picked up from 6 different locations on the same helicopter. And anybody who knows anything about security tells you that you don't put the top 6 people in your army on the same helicopter. And that helicopter crashed, and they died. Coincidentally, yes. So after 2003, there was literally nobody within the army that could lead a military coup. There was nobody within the government that could rise to the top and be visible on the political scene to be a potential candidate. So even right now, there is really no leadership. I mean, this is a leaderless revolution, which is good in some sense. But this created an atmosphere in Tunisia between 2003 and 2010 where there was basically no hope for change.